Hey, speaking of Russia, you know who's really in the pocket of Russia? Donald Trump went to the NATO summit, and this is before he left. Donald Trump had this to say about his barnstorming trip. He was going to Europe. He was going to avoid as much of Great Britain as possible because they were mocking him. And he is in NATO now. But listen to how he refers to it. I mean, just listen to the way he presents this.
So I have NATO. I have the UK, which is in somewhat turmoil. And I have Putin. Frankly, Putin may be the easiest of them all. Who would think? Who would think?
A lot of us would think that.
NATO is, and look, I think NATO expanded inappropriately in the wake of the fall of the Soviet Union. I think that we are extremely over-militarized. But let's also be clear that the NATO apparatus has been rather durable and was formed in the wake of 2 world wars that happened in less time than young Matt has been alive, right? Over a span of pretty close. Maybe, I don't know, maybe Michael. But nevertheless, certainly a lot less time than I've been alive. Like, I remember more time passing than passed between 2 world wars, where we're talking about the death of millions of people. So, say what you will about NATO, it has been a fairly stabilizing force. Definitely think that things can be handled better, but the idea that there's something fundamentally problematic about NATO is completely a function of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is over in Europe now arguing that NATO owes us money. This is absurd. He's complaining about, well, we'll get to this next clip in a moment, but he is claiming that NATO owes us money. The amount of money that we put into NATO, I don't even think represents like a percentage point of our military budget. The NATO budget itself is a $1.4 billion military budget and a $250 million civilian budget. The U.S. pays about 22% of this. Our military budget of this year is $700 billion. $700 billion. So the idea that NATO owes us money is sort of is absurd. It's absurd. And then if the argument is, but we have troops in Germany, we have troops, around the world and whatnot, well, then make that argument. Shrink instead of adding $90 billion to our military budget. Like, we have the ability to cut back far more than even if we were to walk away from NATO by a power of 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50. I mean, it's as if he has no idea of what he is talking about at all. And it really does beg the question, like, what's going on here? Like, are there really people in the heartland who, in the Rust Belt who are going like, man, those Belgium folks are taking us to the cleaners.
To the cleaners.
Honestly, like where does this come from?
Well, it's just an extension of the same stat years ago that there was that old poll that Americans thought that the most of government spending was welfare and foreign aid. So he's just basically taking military and turning it into foreign aid as a talking point.
I guess. But it seems to me like...
Dude, in his constituents, anytime you say feckless Europeans are spending your money on anything,
that could be fair enough. All right. And so, meanwhile, Trump is convinced that NATO is the biggest threat to the United States, that he can handle Putin. They'll get along fine. And I don't think Putin is a particular threat to the United States in a massive way. I mean, we just heard that they did launch some form of attack on our election systems. Nevertheless, it's unclear. You can be guilty of something like that and still not be a threat insofar as you have the ability to carry it out, right? Like I can shoot you with a gun and miss because I'm blind. And so maybe I'm not that much of a threat if you have well, let me put it this way. If I have a bow and arrow and I'm shooting you and I'm blind, I'm not that much of a threat. I still am attempting to kill you. And I still have committed a crime, but I'm just not that much of a threat. So I don't know how much Russia is a threat to us. But
I know how much of a threat the GOP is, and it'd be nice for anybody to stop helping them.
Yeah, indeed.
Russia is a great threat to the world as an extension of its support for Republicans governing the United
Donald
States.
Trump, yes. Right. Here is Donald Trump, and that is Kay Bailey Hutchins, right? She must be some ambassador, I think.
I guess they probably just stuck her in some oil.
He's at dinner somewhere, and he's talking about Germany. And again, I don't know if he just makes this stuff up or he hears it once and he thinks he remembers it, or he doesn't have to read his briefings or what. But
you really don't think he reads his briefings? I mean, my God, I think we can be cynical about this.
Give him some cheat sheets or
yeah.
something. But here he is opining about Germany's problem. Remember when Hillary Clinton said, "You're a puppet"?
No
and
puppet.
He goes, "I'm not the puppet. You're the puppet. You're the puppet." This sort of feels like that.
But Germany is totally controlled by Russia because they were getting from 60 to 70% of their energy from Russia and a new pipeline. And you tell me if that's appropriate, because I think it's not. And I think it's a very bad thing for NATO, and I don't think it should have happened. And I think we have to talk to Germany about it. On top of that, Germany...
Pause it for 1 second. I will agree with Donald Trump that any country that gets 60 to 70% of its energy from outside its borders, B, one country out there is seriously compromised. At least, like, there's the potential for someone to just, like, turn off the spigot and shut them down.
They do in Ukraine.
It's a problem. When Donald Trump speaks to Germany, after this, maybe they will tell him, that's not accurate, actually. We get about 20% of our energy comes from natural gas, and a little more than half of that comes from Russia. So we're talking anywhere from 10 to 15% probably. I've heard as low as 9% of their energy comes from Russia. That's very different than 60 or 70%, right? Because 10% is like...
meant real energy. Because don't forget, 30% of that is renewables. That's not real energy.
There you go. So
that doesn't count.
So you can make up 10% much easier than you could 70%. If I was to cut down 10% of my calories, I think I would be a little bit uncomfortable, but I don't think I would be like I would be if I was cutting down on 70% of my calories.
You know what a Trump supporter would say if you just explained that all to them? You know what he meant.
I know what he meant. I know what he meant.
That is exactly right.
A decent amount of energy.
That's exactly what they would say.
Let's let him go on here.
about it. On top of that, Germany is just paying a little bit over 1%, whereas the United States in actual numbers is paying 4.2% of a much larger GDP. So I think that's inappropriate also. You know, we're protecting Germany, we're protecting France, we're protecting everybody, and yet we're paying a lot of money to protect. Now, this has been going on for decades. This has been brought up by other presidents, but other presidents never did anything about it, because I don't think they understood it, or they just didn't want to get involved. But I have to bring it up because I think it's very unfair to our country, it's very unfair to our taxpayer. And I think that these countries have to step it up, not over a 10-year period, they have to step it up immediately.
We're talking literally like, well, now I would love $100 million, but I mean, we're talking about a couple $100 million he's talking about here when we have a military budget of $700 billion. Let's just cut our military budget. You want to not pay for them to protect? That has nothing to do with NATO. Take those 30,000 troops out. Cut our military budget.
And also,
don't raise it. How about starting with don't raise our military budget?
U.S. president's been pushing the Europeans to create, to expand their military spending since Clinton, at least.
Of
That's
course.
like, and there is.
And
that,
notice why we're doing that is because we want to sell weapons.
Yeah, we want a new arms sale market.
Exactly. We just telling like,
no, Donald's right. I just didn't understand the issue.
Do you think we can gauge how concerned Trump is about the Mueller investigation by how much projecting he does?
I mean,
accusing other people of being controlled by Russia? Is that like too linear a thought pattern for him?
No, I think that's...
You're controlled by Russia.
Your elections are hacked.
Your elections are hacked. This whole show's
maybe
a Russia
you're
show.
projecting.
Maybe,
you're the
yeah,
projector.
You're the projector. You're the projector.
I mean...
All she ever does is project.
I think
What?
so. I think so.
Yes,
I mean,
I think that's true.
I think it's like a low, like a mid-grade anxiety that comes out. And so everything is framed in that way.
It's all impulsive.
It's all impulse.
Fascinating.
It's all right. So let's go back.